Have you ever noticed how the hardest journey is not to someplace new, but to somewhere you've never left? Tonight, we explore a teaching that sounds impossible at first, like being told to step backward while standing still. But this paradox holds one of the most profound truths in all of Zen wisdom. These reflections are contemplative in nature, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. The great 13th century Japanese master Dogen taught about something called the backward step, what he called iko hensho in Japanese. Stop searching out there, he said. Stop chasing after phrases and words. Take the backward step and turn the light inward. The Chinese Chan masters before him had called it the Great Return, the Great Reversal, going back to the root, returning to the source. Not because we've lost something, not because we need to go somewhere else, but because what we're searching for was never actually lost. Perhaps tonight you lie here because something feels missing. Perhaps you've been running so hard toward the next thing that you forgot to notice you were already home. The mind races forward, planning, worrying, rehearsing tomorrow's conversations, replaying today's mistakes. And all that forward motion exhausts you. What if the deepest rest comes not from pushing ahead but from this gentle turning around? What if peace isn't waiting at the end of some long spiritual journey, but is simply what remains when you stop running, like so many subscribe for more rest wisdom? Or just let your eyes close now and allow these ancient stories to carry you home to yourself. Tonight we'll journey through stories from across the Buddhist world. Masters who climbed mountains only to discover the treasure at the base. Monks who traveled vast distances to find teachers who sent them right back to where they started. Kings who searched the kingdom for what was sitting in their own palace. Each story different, each from a different tradition, but all pointing to the same backward step, the same return, the same homecoming that costs nothing except the willingness to turn around. Let your body settle deeper into rest now. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice how the breath doesn't need your permission to flow. There's nothing to figure out tonight. No forward progress required. Just this gentle returning to what's already here. What's always been here. What could never actually be lost. We begin. In 10th century China, during the late Tang dynasty, there lived a monk named Liaoran, whose name meant clear and obvious, though he felt anything but clear. He had studied the sutras for 15 years in a small monastery outside Hangzhou, memorizing passage after passage until the words lived in his mind like birds in an aviary, always fluttering, never still. The other monks said he was brilliant. His abbot praised his scholarship. But Liaoran felt hollow. He was 33 years old, and he had never experienced what the texts described. Peace remained words on a page. Awakening stayed locked in ancient stories about other people. Luckier people. People who lived when the Dharma was still fresh and the masters still walked the earth with fire in their eyes. Every morning before dawn, Liaoran would sit in the meditation hall with the others, his back straight as bamboo, his breath moving in the prescribed way, counting, watching, noticing. But his mind was a marketplace at festival time. Thoughts crashed into each other like merchants haggling over silk prices. Did I lock the sutra cabinet? The kitchen monk dislikes me. I saw it in his eyes yesterday. Am I breathing correctly? The masters in the old stories never seemed to struggle like this. What's wrong with me? When will I finally understand? The meditation bell would ring, and Liaoran would open his eyes to find an hour had passed, and he had spent it entirely lost in this internal noise. He would bow to the Buddha statue and feel like a fraud. Then one autumn, news arrived that Master Yunmen was teaching at a monastery on Mount Huangbo, 300 li to the west. Yunmen was famous, a lineage holder in the great tradition, a man who had reportedly achieved such profound realization that even his silence could wake people up. Liao Ran's heart leaped. This was it. This was what he needed. He would go to Yunmen to receive the teaching directly from an awakened master, and finally understand. His abbot was skeptical. Liao Ran, the Dharma is not somewhere else. I know, master, but I've studied here for 15 years, and I'm no closer. Perhaps I need fresh instruction, a different approach. The abbot sighed, a sound like wind through pine needles. Go then. But remember that wherever you go, you take yourself with you. Liao Ran bowed 3 times and set off the next morning with a small bundle, his begging bowl, and a heart full of hope that felt dangerous, like holding a bowl of water while running. The journey took 2 weeks. The road wound through valleys where mist hung like silk curtains between the hills. Liao Ran walked past rice paddies where farmers stood knee-deep in water, their broad hats like mushrooms dotting the green. He crossed rivers on narrow bridges, stayed in village temples, ate whatever people offered. Usually it was thin rice gruel. Sometimes it was nothing. At night, lying on temple floors or under trees, Liao Ran would think about what he would ask Master Yunmen. How do you stop the mind from thinking? What is the experience of awakening really like? How long did it take you? What am I doing wrong? The questions piled up like stones in a cairn, each one heavy with his desperation. On the 13th day, the mountains came into view. Huangbo rose against the sky like a great sleeping dragon, its peaks shrouded in cloud. Liao Ran's legs ached. His feet were blistered. His robe was dusty from the road, but his heart raced. Soon he would meet the master. Soon everything would change. He began the climb at dawn. The path switchbacked up the mountainside, steep and rocky. Liao Ran's breath came hard. Sweat soaked his robe. But he pushed on, driven by the hope that had carried him 300 li. Halfway up the mountain, he passed an old woman sitting beside the path. She was selling tea from a small table, a fire burning in a clay stove, water steaming in an iron kettle. She looked about 70, her face creased like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. She was pouring tea into a small cup, the liquid amber in the morning light. "Tea, young monk," she called out. "You look tired." Liao Ran was about to wave her off, too focused on reaching the monastery, but something in her voice made him stop. A kindness, a knowing quality. "Yes, grandmother. Thank you." He sat on a stone beside her table. She poured him a cup. The tea was simple, probably mountain herbs and whatever she could forage, but it was hot and good. Liao Ran drank, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" she asked. "To the monastery, grandmother. I've come 300 li to study with Master Yunmen." 300 li. She shook her head. "That's a long way to walk." "It is, but I need his teaching. I've been practicing for 15 years and I still haven't found what I'm looking for." The old woman poured herself a cup, sipped it slowly. "And what are you looking for?" Liao Ran opened his mouth and then closed it. The question seemed simple, but he realized he didn't quite know how to answer. "Peace," he finally said. "Understanding. The Dharma. Whatever it is the masters have that I don't." "Ah." She nodded, staring into her tea. "You think Master Yunmen has it, And you don't, he's realized. Grandmother, I'm not. She laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. How do you know you're not realized? Liaoran felt a flash of frustration. Because my mind never stops. Because I'm always anxious, always seeking, always feeling like something is missing. The texts describe peace and clarity, and I don't have those things. The old woman sipped her tea. And right now, sitting here, drinking this tea, is your mind working? Yes, it's always working. That's the problem. Is it hot or cold? This morning, Liaoran blinked at the sudden change of topic. Cool. The morning is cool. Do you feel the cool? Yes. Are you tasting the tea? Yes. Are you hearing the birds in the trees? The wind in the bamboo? Yes. But grandmother, what does this, and is all of that peace? Or is peace something else you're looking for on top of that? Liaoran stopped. His mouth opened, but no words came. The question landed in him like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. The old woman smiled. Master Yunmen is a good teacher. Maybe he'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you, but in fancier words. She poured him more tea. The Dharma you're seeking, young monk, it's not up the mountain. It's not something Yunmen has, and you don't. It's what's here, now, in this moment. It's the tea and the cool air and the sound of your own breath. You walked 300 li looking for something you never left behind. Liaoran sat, very still. The tea steam rose between them. A bird called from somewhere in the pines. The morning light was turning the mist golden. He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that it couldn't be this simple, that there must be more to it, that 15 years of study must lead to something more than this. Drinking tea with an old woman on a mountainside. But he didn't argue. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He stopped trying to figure it out. He just sat there. He drank the tea. He felt the cool air on his skin. He heard the birds. He noticed the tiredness in his legs and the strange lightness in his chest. 300 li, the old woman said softly. Just to hear that you can stop walking. Liaoran looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes were bright, clear as mountain springs. And in that moment he understood something that made him want to laugh and cry at once. She wasn't just an old woman selling tea, and this wasn't just a chance encounter. Are you going to continue up the mountain? She asked. Liaoran looked up the path toward the monastery, then back down the way he'd come. He felt something shift in him, like a door opening that he hadn't known was closed. I think, he said slowly, I've already arrived. The old woman nodded. She poured them both more tea. They sat together in the morning light, two people drinking tea on a mountainside, which was also two people drinking tea on a mountainside, which was also everything that needed to happen in that moment. Nothing more, nothing less. Later, Liaoran did continue up to visit Master Yunmen. The master asked him one question. Where have you come from? From 300 li away, Liaoran replied. But also from nowhere at all. Yunmen laughed, a sound like thunder rolling over mountains. Good. Then you wasted a perfectly good journey. What did you learn? That the Dharma doesn't live in the monastery or in the sutras or in special moments. It's just this ordinary tea drinking, road walking, breathtaking life. Adequate, Yunmen said. Not brilliant, but adequate. Now go home and live it. So Liaoran walked back down the mountain. 300 li home. Every step, an arrival. Every breath, a homecoming. The same man who had climbed up, but also completely different. Or, perhaps, finally and fully, exactly himself. The searching mind can travel thousands of miles, seeking something precious. But the seeking itself is the problem. Not because seeking is wrong, but because what you're looking for is the awareness that's doing the seeking. It's the space in which the search happens. Like looking for your glasses while wearing them. This is what the old masters meant by returning to the source. Not going back to some mystical origin point, but recognizing what's already here. The awareness that notices the anxiety is itself peaceful. The consciousness that registers thoughts is itself clear. You're searching for the searcher. And here's what makes this tricky in modern life. Our culture tells us constantly that fulfillment is elsewhere. The next achievement, the next relationship, the next spiritual breakthrough, the next meditation technique. We scroll through social media seeing everyone else's highlight reel, convinced they have something we lack. We read self-help books and spiritual teachings and collect techniques like Liaoran collected sutras, hoping one of them will finally be the key. But the backward step isn't about gaining something. It's about recognizing what was never actually absent. Think of someone searching for their phone while talking on it. The phone is there. It's functioning. It's in use. The only thing missing is the recognition. Maybe you've experienced this in small moments. You're worried about an upcoming meeting, spinning stories about everything that could go wrong. Then you step outside and feel the sun on your face, or hear a bird sing, or taste your coffee, and for just a second, the stories pause. There's just this sensation, awareness, being. That pause isn't a special state. That's what's always here, underneath the stories. The peace you're seeking isn't waiting at the end of some journey. It's the awareness noticing the journey. It's here in this moment, reading these words, feeling the weight of your body, hearing whatever sounds surround you. Not a perfect state, not some special consciousness, just this ordinary awareness, always already present. Like Liaoran walking 300 li only to discover he never left home, the backward step is realizing that home is here. It always was. It's just that the mind was so busy traveling, it didn't notice. Let your shoulders soften. Feel the pillow beneath your head. Notice the breath moving without your help. You don't need to go anywhere to find peace. It's the space in which restlessness happens. You don't need to become anything you're not. You already are the awareness that notices the becoming. The old woman on the mountain asks her question across the centuries. What are you looking for? And the answer might be simpler than you think. Not up the mountain. Not in the next moment. Here, in the cool morning air, in the taste of tea, in the simple fact of being alive. And as the mind settles around this, softening its search, we turn now to another journey. Another seeker learning the same ancient lesson in a different time and place. In 12th century Korea, during the Goryeo dynasty, there lived a young monk named Myeongwon, whose ordained name meant bright source, though he felt anything but bright. He had joined Cheongwonsa temple in the southern mountains when he was just 17, fleeing a life that had felt too small, too ordinary, too painfully human. His father had been a rice merchant in Changpyeong, a man who measured his days in sacks and copper coins, who rose before dawn and slept with his hands, still smelling of grain. Myeongwon, then called simply Dae Sok, had watched his father grow old at 40, bent like the bamboo poles he used for carrying loads, and had thought, there must be more than this. There must be something extraordinary hiding beneath the surface of this ordinary world. So he had run to the monastery, his heart burning with what he thought was spiritual longing, but which was really just a young man's desperate need to be special, to escape the humble inevitability of his father's life. Now, at 25, 8 years into monastic life, Myungwon sat in the meditation hall each morning and felt the same heaviness his father must have felt, carrying sacks of rice. The weight was different, not grain but expectation, not physical but spiritual, but it bent him just the same. The monastery was led by Master Gyeongan, an old monk who had studied under one of the great Chinese Chan masters before returning to Korea. Gyeongan taught what he called the direct method, the sudden path. Your mind is already Buddha, he would say, his voice rough as stone grinding stone. Stop searching and recognize what you already are. But Myungwon could not recognize it. When he looked inward, all he saw was Daesok, the merchant's son, the boy who had been afraid of ordinariness, who had run from home, not toward enlightenment, but away from failure. He saw his petty jealousies when other monks were praised. He saw his pride when he performed rituals well. He saw the way his mind skittered and jumped like stones across water, never sinking into the profound depths the old texts described. Myungwon, Master Gyeongan would say, watching him struggle in morning interviews, you are looking for something complicated when the answer is simple. Right now, as you sit here worrying about finding your Buddha nature, who is it that's doing the worrying? Me, Myungwon would answer, feeling stupid. And who is this me? I don't know. Then sit with that not knowing. Sit with the one who says, I don't know. Who is that? Round and round these exchanges went, year after year, until Myungwon wanted to scream. The other monks seemed to grasp something he couldn't. They sat with a stillness that eluded him. They smiled with what looked like genuine peace, while Myungwon felt like an actor in monk's robes, performing a role he didn't understand. One autumn, word came that a famous monk named Jinul was teaching at Suseonsa Temple, 3 days' walk to the northwest. Jinul had recently passed the royal examination for monks, but had walked away from the prestige and position it offered, choosing instead to live in the mountains with a small group of practitioners dedicated to what he called pure practice meditation and wisdom combined. No politics, no fame-seeking, just the Dharma. Myungwon's heart leaped at the news. This was his chance. A fresh teacher, a new approach. Surely Jinul would have the key that Gyeongan's teachings lacked. He approached his master to ask permission to visit. Gyeongan looked at him for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable in the lamplight. You think Jinul has something you don't have? I think perhaps his method would suit me better. Master, you teach sudden awakening, but 8 years have passed and I haven't awakened suddenly or any other way. Maybe I need a different approach. Maybe, Gyeongan said. He poured tea, the movement slow and deliberate. Or maybe you need to understand what awakening actually is. You think it's a special state, a magical transformation. You think one day you'll wake up and be somebody different, somebody better. Somebody not Daesok, the merchant's son. Myungwon flinched. He had not told his master about these thoughts, but apparently his face had told them anyway. Go visit Jinul, Gyeongan said. Maybe he'll tell you the same thing in words you can finally hear. The journey took 4 days because Myungwon walked slowly, savoring the anticipation. Autumn had turned the mountain slopes into fire. maples burning red and gold against the dark pines. The air smelled of wood smoke and falling leaves. Farmers were harvesting rice in the valleys, their songs floating up through the mist. It reminded Myungwon of his childhood, of his father, and he pushed the memories away, focusing instead on the meeting ahead. Susionsa Temple was smaller than Myungwon had imagined, just a handful of buildings clustered on a forested hillside. No grand gates, no impressive statuary, just simple wooden halls weathered grey by mountain weather, and a handful of monks moving quietly through their routines. Myungwon was shown to a small waiting room. Through the open door, he could see other monks in the courtyard, raking leaves, carrying water, performing the ordinary tasks that made up monastic life. They looked just like the monks at his own temple. He felt the first flutter of doubt. When Jinul entered the room, Myungwon was surprised again. The famous teacher was only about 35, not much older than Myungwon himself, with a round face and kind eyes and an air of such complete ordinariness that Myungwon almost laughed. This was the great master? He looked like someone you'd see selling vegetables in the market. "You've come from Cheongwonsa," Jinul said, settling onto a cushion. It wasn't a question. "Yes, teacher. I've been practicing there for 8 years under Master Gyeongan. A good teacher." "What brings you here?" Myungwon had prepared this speech, practiced it during the walk. "I'm seeking true awakening. Teacher, I practice diligently. I sit every morning. I study the sutras. I perform the rituals. But nothing happens. I don't feel any different than I did 8 years ago. I'm still just me, ordinary, troubled, unawakened." Jinul nodded, pouring tea. "And what did you expect to feel? Different, peaceful, enlightened?" "Ah." Jinul smiled. "And right now, do you feel peaceful?" "No. I feel frustrated and confused and like I've wasted 8 years." "Can you feel your frustration?" The question was so odd that Myungwon stopped. "Yes. Of course I can feel it. And who is it that's aware of this frustration?" Myungwon's stomach sank. It was the same question Gyeongan always asked. Had he walked 4 days just to hear the same teaching? "I don't know," he said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "Look more closely. Right now, in this moment, there is frustration arising in your experience." "Yes, yes. And there is awareness of that frustration. Something in you knows you're frustrated. Otherwise, we couldn't be having this conversation." "Yes, yes. That awareness, is it frustrated?" Myungwon opened his mouth and then closed it. He looked inward. Actually looked, instead of just reflexively answering. There was frustration, a tight knot in his chest, a sense of disappointment. And there was what? Something watching the frustration. Something that registered it, knew it, but wasn't consumed by it. I'm not sure. The frustration comes and goes, doesn't it? Sometimes you feel it strongly. Sometimes it fades. But the awareness that knows frustration, does that come and go? Or is it always there, simply registering whatever arises? Myungwon sat very still. A bird called from the garden. The sound of raking continued outside. Inside him, something shifted, like a door opening into a room that had always been there but he'd never noticed. "It's always there," he said slowly. "Yes. That awareness, that's what we call your original nature. Your Buddha nature. It's not something you need to achieve or become. It's what you already are. It's what's looking through your eyes right now. It's what's been present every single moment of your 8 years of practice. Myungwon felt tears prickling his eyes. But it's so. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. Jinul agreed. As ordinary as breathing. As ordinary as your father carrying rice. Do you know what your problem is? Myungwon, you've been searching for something extraordinary because you're running from something ordinary. You think Buddha nature should feel special, magical, different from your regular human consciousness. But Buddha nature is simply this, the basic awareness that's here, right now, in this ordinary moment, in this ordinary body, with this ordinary frustration and this ordinary tea and this ordinary autumn afternoon. Then I've been awake this whole time? In a way. But you didn't know it. That's the difference. Awakening isn't becoming something you're not. It's recognizing what you already are. It's like Jinul paused, searching for the right image. It's like a person born rich who grows up thinking they're poor because they never looked in the family treasury. The wealth was always there. They just didn't know it. Myungwon sat with this. The frustration was still there, but now there was also something else. A spaciousness around it. A sense of standing back and watching the frustration happen without being entirely consumed by it. But teacher, if this is awakening, why do I still feel frustrated? Why do I still have all these petty thoughts and emotions? Because awakening isn't the end of being human. It's the beginning of being human consciously. The thoughts and emotions will still arise, that's how minds work. But now you can recognize them as movements within your awareness, rather than believing they're who you are. It's like Jinul gestured to the window, where leaves were falling. The sky doesn't stop being the sky when clouds pass through it. Your awareness doesn't stop being awareness when frustration or jealousy or fear passes through it. So I just... What? Watch it all happen? You watch. Yes. And gradually, with practice, you stop identifying so completely with every thought and emotion that arises. That's what I call gradual cultivation. The sudden awakening is seeing that you're the sky, not the clouds. The gradual cultivation is learning to live from that recognition, moment by moment, until it becomes natural. They sat in silence for a while. The tea grew cold. Outside, the monks finished raking and moved on to other tasks. Everything was exactly as it had been before. And yet Myungwon felt as if he was seeing it for the first time. I ran away from home because I didn't want to be ordinary like my father, Myungwon said quietly. But he was already this too, wasn't he? This awareness. He just didn't know it. Everyone is, Jinul said. The tragedy is that most people live their whole lives without recognizing it. They think they need to become something special, achieve something extraordinary. But the treasure is already here. It's been here all along. Myungwon stayed at Suseonsa for 3 more days, sitting with the community, working alongside the other monks, continuing his conversations with Jinul. Each day felt both completely ordinary and completely new, as if he were learning to see with fresh eyes. On the morning, he prepared to leave. Jinul walked with him to the temple gate. "What will you tell Master Gyeongan when you return?" Jinul asked. Myungwon smiled. "That I walked 4 days to hear what he's been telling me for 8 years. Good. That's very good. And now you can actually hear it. Teacher, one more question. If this is all there is, this ordinary awareness, why do we practice? Why meditate? Why study? Why live in monasteries? Because Jinul said, knowing intellectually that you're awake and actually living from that awakening are two different things. You've had a glimpse today. Now comes the real work, returning to that recognition again and again, until it's not something you try to remember but simply how you are. That's the cultivation. That's the practice. Myungwon bowed deeply and set off down the mountain, 4 days back to Cheongwonsa. But this time, he wasn't running from anything or toward anything. He was just walking, each step an expression of the awareness that had been there all along. When he arrived back at his temple, Master Gyeong-an was sweeping the courtyard. He looked up, met Myungwon's eyes, and smiled. "Find what you were looking for?" the old master asked. "I found that I already had it," Myungwon replied. "Adequate. Not brilliant, but adequate. Now comes the hard part, not losing it." They swept the courtyard together in companionable silence. Two monks performing an ordinary task with an extraordinary awareness of the ordinariness of it all. Years later, Myungwon would take over as abbot of Cheongwonsa. He would teach students who came to him seeking something special, something extraordinary, something to lift them out of their ordinary human lives. And he would smile and pour them tea and ask them, "Right now, as you sit here seeking, who is it that's doing the seeking?" Round and round the teaching would go, simple and endless, pointing always to the same recognition. You are already what you're looking for. You've always been what you're looking for. You could never not be what you're looking for, because what you're looking for is the very awareness that's doing the looking, the search for something better, something more, something beyond this moment. It's so deeply human. We scroll through our phones, seeing others' seemingly perfect lives, and feel our own inadequacy. We read spiritual teachings and think enlightenment must be some peak experience we haven't had yet. We compare ourselves to others who seem calmer, happier, more put together, and conclude there's something wrong with us. But what if the very awareness that registers your sense of inadequacy is already whole? What if the consciousness that notices your racing thoughts is itself perfectly still? What if you're searching for something you've never actually lost? Think about this carefully. Right now, reading these words, there's awareness present. You know you're reading. You know what you're thinking and feeling. That knowing, is it anxious? Or is it the space in which anxiety appears? Is it inadequate? Or is it the ground in which the story of inadequacy plays out? This is what Jinul meant by original nature. Not some mystical state you achieve after years of practice. Just this basic, ordinary awareness that's here right now. It's been here every moment of your life. It was here when you were 5 years old looking at clouds. It was here yesterday during your difficult meeting. It's here now, reading these words, hearing these sounds, feeling whatever you're feeling. The practice isn't about becoming aware. You're already aware. The practice is about recognizing that the awareness you already are is the treasure you've been seeking. It's about learning to live from that recognition instead of from the stories the mind tells about inadequacy and lack. This doesn't mean the difficult emotions go away. Jinul's teaching wasn't that awakening makes you stop being human. It's that awakening means being human with awareness. The frustration still arises. The fear still visits. The self-doubt still appears. But you're no longer entirely fused with these experiences. There's the awareness of them. And that awareness is spacious enough to hold it all. Your father, your mother, the person who cuts you off in traffic, the colleague who irritates you, they're all this too. This same basic awareness, having different experiences, living different stories, but made of the same essential stuff. Recognizing your own Buddha nature makes you gentler with everyone else's struggles. Because you see, we're all the same awareness, temporarily forgetting what we are, searching for what we've never lost. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. Notice the breath moving in and out. Hear the ambient sounds around you. All of this is arising in awareness. And that awareness that's home, that's the source you're returning to. Not far away, not in the future, right here, right now. Closer than breathing, more intimate than thought. Simple, ordinary, and utterly extraordinary in its ordinariness. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. The one who notices these sensations, that's already free. That's already home. That's already what you've been seeking in every spiritual book, every meditation, every desperate late-night Google search for how to find peace. You are already that peace. You just didn't know it. Now you do. And knowing changes everything and nothing. The autumn leaves still fall. The work still needs doing. The heart still feels what it feels. But you're no longer fighting the sky for having clouds. Breathing softly now. Letting this recognition settle deeper than thought. And as the mind turns this truth over like a river stone worn smooth, we move to another story. Another way, this same ancient recognition has appeared across time. In eastern Tibet, in the year 1845, a young woman named Pema Chodron lived in a small village beneath the shadow of sacred Mount Kailash. Her ordained name, which she would receive later, meant Lotus Dharma Light. But at 22, she was simply Pema, daughter of a barley farmer, wife to a wool trader, and a woman who felt like she was drowning in her own mind. Every night, she would lie awake while her husband snored beside her, listening to her thoughts spin like prayer wheels that never stop turning. What if the harvest fails? What if my husband's business collapses? What if I've offended the village elder's wife with my careless words at the well? What if I'm a terrible person pretending to be good? What if an endless cascade of worry pouring through her mind like water through a broken dam? During the day, she performed her duties mechanically, grinding tsampa, spinning wool, tending the butter lamps at the family shrine, smiling when expected, speaking when spoken to. But inside, she felt absent, watching her life happen as if through thick glass, never quite present, never quite real, always lost in the next worry or the last regret. The village had a small temple where monks from the nearby monastery would sometimes come to teach. Most of the villagers attended out of tradition. Sitting through teachings, they half understood about karma and rebirth and the 6 realms. Pema attended because it was the one time her mind seemed to quiet slightly, soothed by the drone of prayers and the smell of incense. One spring, a lama named Tenzin Wangyal arrived to give teachings on Dzogchen, the Great Perfection. He was not an impressive figure, perhaps 50 years old, ordinary looking, with a round face that creased easily into smiles and eyes that seemed to see through pretense. He wore the maroon robes simply, without decoration, and when he walked, it was with an easy grace that suggested he had nowhere urgent to be. The teaching I will share this week, he began on the first evening, is both the simplest and the most difficult. Simple because it requires nothing you don't already have. Difficult because it asks you to stop doing what you've been doing your entire life. Pema sat in the back with the other women, trying to pay attention but already feeling her mind wander. What should I cook tomorrow? Did I offend anyone today? Am I sitting correctly right now? Tenzin Wangyal continued. As you sit here, your mind is probably busy with thoughts. Planning, worrying, judging, comparing. This is what minds do. They think. But I want to ask you a question. Who is it that knows your mind is busy? Pema blinked. The question seemed to reach through her distraction and touch something deeper. If you're aware that you're thinking, the Lama said, then there must be an awareness that's separate from the thinking. Yes, the thoughts come and go like clouds. But the awareness that sees the thoughts, what is that? Is that also coming and going, or is it always here? Simply registering whatever passes through? The room was silent, except for the flutter of prayer flags outside and the distant bark of a dog. In Tsokyen, Tenzin Wangyal said, "We call this pristine awareness Rigpa. It's not something you need to create or achieve. It's what you already are, in this very moment. But most of us live our entire lives identified with the clouds, the thoughts, the emotions, the stories, and we never notice the sky." Over the next several evenings, Pema returned to hear more. Each night, Tenzin Wangyal would sit on a simple cushion and speak in plain language about something that sounded simultaneously obvious and impossible. "Your thoughts tell you stories," he said on the second night. "They say, I am inadequate. I am anxious. I am a failure. I am wonderful. I am terrible." And you believe these stories completely. You think they're describing who you are, but they're just weather patterns in consciousness. They come, they go. The awareness that watches them come and go, that's what you actually are. Pema listened with her whole being. This was different from the traditional teachings about merit and rebirth. This was pointing at something immediate, something she could almost touch. On the third evening, she approached the Lama after the teaching. Her hands trembled slightly as she bowed. "Venerable teacher, I think I understand what you're saying in theory. But practically, I don't know how to find this Rigpa you speak of. My mind is always so busy, so troubled. How do I get to this pristine awareness beneath the thoughts?" Tenzin Wangyal smiled. "You're asking the wrong question. You're asking how to get somewhere. But you're already there. Rigpa isn't a destination. It's what's noticing right now that your mind is busy and troubled. But it doesn't feel peaceful. It doesn't feel pristine. The thoughts aren't peaceful. The emotions aren't pristine. But the awareness of them, look more carefully. Is that disturbed? Or is disturbance simply something it's registering?" Pema stood there, feeling stupid and hopeful in equal measure. "Try this," the Lama said gently. "Tonight, when you lie awake, worrying, don't try to stop the worries. Instead, just notice. There are worries arising. There is awareness of worries arising. Can you feel the difference between the two? Can you sense the space in which the worries are appearing?" That night, Pema lay in the darkness beside her sleeping husband, and the familiar cascade of anxieties began. What if the wool prices fall? What if we can't pay the temple taxes? What if my husband grows tired of me? But this time, instead of being swept away, she tried what the Lama suggested. She noticed, there are worries. There is something aware of worries. At first, she couldn't sense any difference. The worries and the awareness of them seemed identical. But then, in a moment she couldn't have predicted or manufactured, something shifted. It was as if she'd been standing with her nose pressed against a painting, unable to see anything but brushstrokes. And suddenly, she'd stepped back. The worries were still there, but they were happening in something larger. A space, an awareness. a quiet witnessing that didn't participate in the anxiety while still fully registering it. The shift lasted maybe 10 seconds before she lost it, her mind collapsing back into identification with the thoughts. But those 10 seconds changed everything. She had glimpsed something, a dimension of her experience she'd never noticed, because she'd always been too busy being lost in experience to notice the awareness in which experience was occurring. The next morning, she could hardly wait for evening to arrive. She rushed through her work, then sat in the temple an hour before the teaching began, hoping to speak with Tenzin Wangyal. He arrived and saw her waiting. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. Last night, just for a moment, there was space. The worries were still there, but they were in something bigger than themselves. But then I lost it. You didn't lose it, Tenzin Wangyal said. You lost the recognition of it. Rigpa never goes anywhere. It's like the sky. The clouds come and go, but the sky is always there. You simply stopped noticing the sky because you got fascinated by a particular cloud formation. So how do I keep noticing it? By recognizing it again and again. This is the practice. Not creating something new, but returning to recognition of what's already present. We call it trek cho, cutting through. Every time you notice you've been lost in thought, that moment of noticing is Rigpa, recognizing itself. It's already happened. You don't need to do anything extra. Just let that recognition be enough. That evening's teaching was on what the Lama called the 3 characteristics of Rigpa. Rigpa has 3 inseparable qualities, he explained. Essence is emptiness. It has no solid existence, no substance you can grasp. Nature is clarity, it knows. It's aware. It registers everything without judgment. And energy is compassion. It responds. It moves. It connects with all things naturally. Pema tried to follow, but the words felt abstract until Tenzin Wangyal gave an example. Think of a mirror, he said. The mirror's essence is that it doesn't hold on to anything. Every image that appears in it vanishes without a trace. Its nature is that it reflects everything clearly without distortion. And its energy is that it responds to whatever appears before it, naturally and without effort. This is how Rigpa is. Empty, clear, and naturally responsive. Something clicked. Pema had spent her whole life trying to control her experience, trying to make the mirror show only pleasant images. But the mirror didn't need her help. It simply reflected what appeared and let it go just as naturally. Over the following weeks, as Tenzin Wangyal continued teaching, Pema developed what he called the habit of recognition. Throughout her day, while grinding sampa, while carrying water, while lying awake at night, she would pause and ask, "What is aware right now?" At first, she could only find it occasionally. Most of the time, she was lost in thought, swept away by the stories her mind told. But gradually, the recognition became more frequent. While arguing with her husband, she would suddenly notice, there's anger arising, and there's awareness of anger arising. While grinding barley, lost in worry, she would catch herself. There are worries, and there's awareness of worries. And in those moments of recognition, something extraordinary happened. The anger or worry didn't necessarily disappear, but it lost its absolute quality. It became one thing happening in consciousness rather than the totality of what was happening. There was the emotion, and there was the vastness in which it appeared. This is why we call it the Great Perfection, Tenzin Wangyal explained one evening. Not because it's some perfect state you achieve, but because the nature of awareness is already complete, already perfect. exactly as it is. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. Even your confusion, even your anxiety, even your worst qualities, they're all movements within awareness. And awareness itself is never tainted by what appears in it, just as the sky is never stained by clouds. Pema felt tears rolling down her face. She had spent so many years trying to fix herself, trying to become someone better, someone less anxious, less flawed. And here was this teaching saying, you don't need fixing. The awareness you are is already whole. The problems are just weather. But Tenzin Wangyal also warned against what he called the mistakes of recognition. Some people, he said, have a taste of Rigpa and think they're enlightened. They think the work is done. This is like seeing the sky for a moment and declaring you're now permanently free of clouds. The clouds will return. The identification with thought will return. The practice is to recognize Rigpa again and again, in all circumstances, until the recognition becomes as natural as breathing. He also warned against using Rigpa as a way to avoid life. Some people discover this spacious awareness and try to stay there constantly, withdrawing from the world. But Rigpa isn't separate from life. It's the nature of life. You don't transcend your humanity by recognizing awareness. You become more fully human because you're no longer fighting your experience. You can feel everything: joy, sorrow, anger, love without being consumed by it. Pema took these teachings to heart. She didn't try to escape her life or abandon her responsibilities. Instead, she learned to live from a different ground. The chores still needed doing. The worries still arose. Her husband still sometimes irritated her. But increasingly, these were experiences happening in awareness rather than experiences that defined who she was. Months passed. Tenzin Wangyal left to teach elsewhere, but his pointing out instruction had taken root. Pema continued the practice on her own, returning again and again to the simple recognition. What is aware? What is the space in which experience appears? One night, lying beside her sleeping husband, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laid awake for hours, drowning in worry. The thoughts still came, the mind never stopped thinking, but she no longer believed them the way she once had. They were like birds flying through the sky of awareness. Some pleasant, some unpleasant, all temporary, none able to stain the sky itself. Years later, when she was older and her husband had died and she had taken ordination as a nun, Pema Chodron would teach this same practice to other women in the village. She would sit on a simple cushion and say, "The treasure you're seeking is already here. It's what's looking through your eyes. It's what's hearing these words. It's what knows your thoughts without being your thoughts. Stop searching for it somewhere else. Simply recognize it where you are." And some would hear her, and some would not. And that was fine too, because Rigpa doesn't need belief or understanding. It's here whether you recognize it or not. Like the sky continues being the sky, whether or not anyone looks up. This pattern of searching for something we already have, it's perhaps the most human thing we do. We scroll through meditation apps, seeking peace, while peace is the awareness doing the scrolling. We read self-help books trying to fix ourselves while the awareness reading the book is already whole. We go to therapy. We do yoga. We try techniques and methods and approaches, all seeking to arrive somewhere we've never actually left. The mind tells such convincing stories. It says, "I'm broken. I need fixing. I'm anxious. I need calming. I'm lost. I need finding." And these stories feel absolutely true in the moment. The anxiety feels real. The sense of being broken feels real. But what if these are just weather patterns in consciousness, clouds passing through a sky that remains untouched? Right now, reading these words, notice there's mental activity happening. Thoughts arising, perhaps agreement or skepticism or confusion. And there's something aware of that mental activity. Can you sense the difference? The mental activity is constantly changing. But the awareness of it, is that changing? Or is it the unchanging background against which all change appears? This is what Dzogchen points to. Not some mystical state achieved after years of practice. Just this basic awareness that's here right now. It doesn't need to be special or blissful or clear. It just needs to be recognized. And recognizing it is the practice. Think about your worst quality. Maybe it's anxiety like Pema's. Maybe it's anger or jealousy or self-criticism. Now notice, there's awareness of this quality. Is the awareness itself anxious? Is consciousness itself angry? Or is it the space in which these qualities appear and disappear? This doesn't mean the difficult qualities vanish. Pema's mind still produced worried thoughts. But she stopped being identical with them. There was the thought, what if everything goes wrong? And there was the vastness that knew that thought without believing it, absolutely. And this changes everything. Not by making life perfect, but by giving you a different relationship to your imperfect life. You can feel anxiety without being anxiety. You can have worried thoughts without being a worried person. You can experience anger without being an angry person. Because the person, the real person, the awareness itself is what witnesses these states without being defined by them. Let your breath settle into its natural rhythm. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice sounds if they're present. All of this is arising in awareness. And that awareness, that's what you are. Not the thoughts about yourself. Not the stories about your past or future. Just this simple, spacious knowing that's been here your whole life, patiently waiting to be recognized. Nothing to achieve. Nowhere to go. You're already home. You've always been home. You just got so busy being lost that you forgot to notice. And now, feeling this recognition settle like snow coming to rest. Breathing softly into this understanding. We journey to another story. Another pointing to this same timeless truth. In central Vietnam, in 1964, in the ancient imperial city of Hue, there lived a young social worker named Lien, whose name meant lotus. She was 28 years old, and she had spent the last 6 years of her life trying to save people while slowly losing herself. The war had torn through Vietnam like a typhoon that never ended. Villages burned, families scattered, children orphaned, and Lien, who had joined the School of Youth for Social Service fresh from university, moved through the devastation, trying to rebuild what bombs destroyed, trying to feed the hungry, trying to reunite parents with children, trying until she no longer remembered what it felt like not to be trying. She worked 18-hour days. She slept on temple floors and in burned-out buildings. She ate when food was available and forgot to eat when it wasn't. She smiled at traumatized children while her own trauma piled up inside her like stones in a well, layer upon layer, until she couldn't remember what the bottom felt like or if there ever had been a bottom. At night, when exhaustion finally forced her to stop moving, her mind would not stop. It replayed the day's horrors. It anticipated tomorrow's emergencies. It calculated rice rations and medicine supplies and how many more families would be displaced by the fighting advancing from the north. It spun and spun like a broken wheel. and Lien would lie in the darkness, feeling like she was drowning on dry land. One afternoon in late spring, after a particularly difficult week evacuating a village that was about to become a battlefield, Lien found herself in Hue with a few hours before the next transport. She was hollow with exhaustion, dirty from travel, and so depleted she felt translucent, as if she might disappear if she stopped moving long enough. She wandered into Tuhio Pagoda, not for any spiritual reason, but simply because it was cool inside and she needed to sit down somewhere quiet. The temple was modest, not one of the grand imperial pagodas, but a simpler place where young monks trained. Prayer flags fluttered in the warm breeze. The scent of sandalwood drifted from inside the main hall. Lien slumped onto a bench in the courtyard garden, closed her eyes, and let the exhaustion wash over her. She didn't pray. She didn't think. She just sat there like a stone, too tired even to cry. After a while, she became aware of someone sitting nearby. She opened her eyes to see a young monk, perhaps in his late 30s, sitting on another bench across the garden path. He wasn't looking at her. He was simply sitting, very still, his hands resting gently in his lap, watching a small lotus bloom floating in a ceramic bowl of water. There was something about his stillness that penetrated Lien's exhaustion. He wasn't frozen or rigid. He was simply there, present, as if sitting and watching a lotus bloom was the most important thing in the world, as if there was nowhere else he needed to be, nothing else he needed to accomplish. Lian felt tears prickling her eyes. When was the last time she had simply sat like that? When was the last time she had been anywhere fully, instead of always being half in the next moment, the next crisis, the next impossible task? The monk noticed her tears and spoke gently. "Sister, you look like someone who has traveled a long way." Lien wiped her face. "Not in distance. In sorrow." He nodded. "That can be the longest journey of all. My name is Nyathang. I teach here sometimes. Would you like to sit with me?" Something in his voice, a quality of deep peace mixed with deep understanding, made Lien feel that he knew exactly what she was carrying. She moved to sit on the bench beside his, still keeping a respectful distance. "I work with the School of Youth for Social Service," she said. "We try to help people caught in the war, rebuild villages, reunite families. But there's so much suffering. Every day, more and more. And I can't." Her voice broke. "You're trying to carry everyone's suffering," Tai Nyathang said softly. "It wasn't a question. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that compassion? Real compassion requires that you first return home to yourself," he said. "Otherwise, you're trying to help others while you yourself are drowning. And eventually, you can't help anyone." Lien looked at him. "Return home to myself? I don't even know what that means anymore. I feel like I've forgotten who I am underneath all this work." Tai Nyathang smiled gently. "Then let me ask you something very simple. Right now, in this moment, are you breathing?" The question was so unexpected that Lien actually paused to check. "Yes." "Can you feel the breath entering your body?" She paid attention. "Yes." "Can you feel yourself sitting here? The weight of your body on this bench? The warmth of the afternoon air on your skin?" "Yes." "Can you hear the prayer flags moving in the wind? The birds in the trees?" "Yes." "Then you're home," he said simply. "Home is not a place you traveled away from. Home is here, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. You've been so busy running toward the future, trying to fix tomorrow's problems, trying to save everyone, that you've forgotten how to be here, now, where you actually are. Lien felt something crack open inside her. The tears came harder now. But if I stop running, if I stop trying to fix everything, won't everything fall apart? Everything is already falling apart. Thay Nhất Hạnh said gently. That's the nature of this world, especially now with the war. The question is, can you be present with what's falling apart? Can you touch your own suffering with tenderness before you try to heal others? Can you come home to this moment, this breath, this simple fact of being alive? He gestured to the lotus in the bowl. See this flower? It grows in mud. Not despite the mud, but because of the mud. If you tried to grow a lotus in clean water, it would die. The lotus needs the mud to bloom. Your suffering, sister, it's the mud. But if you can learn to be present with it, to breathe with it, to touch it with awareness instead of running from it, something beautiful can grow. They sat in silence for a long time. Lien focused on her breath, feeling it move in and out. At first, her mind kept racing back to her work, all the things she should be doing, all the people who needed help. But each time, Thay Nhất Hạnh would gently remind her, come back to the breath. Come home to this moment. Gradually, something shifted. The racing thoughts didn't disappear, but they seemed to quiet slightly. Or perhaps they were still racing, but she had found a place inside herself that was underneath the racing, like finding solid ground beneath rushing water. This is the practice I teach, Thay Nhất Hạnh said. Coming home to the present moment. We do it through mindful breathing, mindful walking, mindful eating, bringing our full attention to whatever we're doing, no matter how simple. This isn't escapism. This isn't avoiding the suffering of the world. This is becoming solid enough, rooted enough, peaceful enough inside yourself that you can actually help others without being destroyed by their suffering. But there's so much to do. Lien whispered, how can I stop and breathe when people are dying? You can breathe while walking to help them. You can breathe while preparing food for them. You can breathe while holding a crying child. The breath doesn't take time away from action. It makes your action more effective because you're actually present for it. When you run from one task to another, with your mind scattered across yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's worries, you're not really helping anyone. You're just creating more suffering inside yourself. He taught her a simple practice. When you breathe in, say to yourself silently, I have arrived. When you breathe out, I am home. Try it now. Lien closed her eyes. Breathed in, I have arrived. Breathed out, I am home. At first, the words felt hollow, even ridiculous. She hadn't arrived anywhere. She wasn't home. She was sitting in a temple garden in a war-torn country with her life falling apart. But Thay Nhất Hạnh encouraged her to continue. Just keep breathing with the words. Don't try to make them true. Just say them and feel what happens. Breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. Slowly, very slowly, something began to shift. She realized she had arrived not at some perfect destination, but at this moment, and this moment was the only place she could ever actually be. The past was gone. The future hadn't happened. All she ever had was right now, right here, this breath. And if this moment was the only place she could ever be, then maybe this moment was home. Tears rolled down her face, but they were different tears now. Not tears of exhaustion or despair. tears of recognition, like remembering something she'd forgotten she knew. The war has made you a refugee in your own life. Thầy Nhất Hạnh said gently, "You've been running from the present moment because the present moment contains pain. But you can't run from the present moment. You can only run through it unconsciously, creating more suffering as you go. The practice is to stop running, to come home, to breathe. And from that place of being home within yourself, you can act with much more clarity and much less suffering." Over the following weeks, Lien returned to Tu Hio whenever she passed through her. Thầy Nhất Hạnh taught her more practices. Mindful walking, taking steps in rhythm with her breath, fully aware of each footfall. Mindful eating, actually tasting her food, chewing slowly, appreciating the miracle of nourishment. Mindful working, bringing her full attention to whatever task was in front of her, instead of doing one thing while worrying about 10 others. These are not separate from your work helping people, he explained. This is how you sustain yourself, so you can keep helping. This is how engaged Buddhism works, deeply engaged with the world's suffering, but rooted in the practice of being present. We don't withdraw from life. We learn to live it fully, moment by moment. He also taught her about what he called interbeing, the interconnectedness of all things. You're not separate from the people you're trying to help. Their suffering is your suffering. But also, your healing is their healing. When you come home to yourself, when you find peace in your own heart, that peace radiates outward. It becomes medicine not just for you, but for everyone around you. Lien began to notice changes. At first subtle, then more pronounced. She still worked long hours. She still encountered terrible suffering. But increasingly, she found she could be present with it instead of being consumed by it. She could hold a traumatized child and breathe with them, her own rootedness becoming an anchor for their storm. She could organize rice distributions while staying connected to her breath, staying home within herself even while moving through chaos. And something else happened. She found that when she was truly present, she could see solutions she'd missed before. Her scattered, anxious mind had been reactive, always putting out fires. But this more grounded, present mind could see patterns, could think creatively, could act with wisdom instead of just with frantic effort. One evening, working late by oil lamp in a makeshift office, Lien realized she had just spent 2 hours completely absorbed in planning a medical clinic, and she couldn't remember the last time her mind had wandered to worry or regret. She had simply been there, fully engaged with the task, breathing steadily, her mind clear and focused. This is it, she thought. This is what Thay meant. Home isn't a place I need to reach. It's the quality of presence I bring to wherever I am. Years later, when the war had ended and Lien had moved to Saigon to teach social work at the university, she would begin each class by leading her students in mindful breathing. Just a few minutes. Breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. Some students thought it was strange at first, but others, especially those who had lived through trauma, who carried their own wells of suffering, understood immediately. They felt what Lien had felt that first afternoon in the temple garden, the recognition that they had been running from the present moment, and that maybe, just maybe, they could stop. They could come home. And from that homecoming, everything else became possible. This pattern of running from the present moment, it's so universal that we barely notice we're doing it. We're driving to work but mentally rehearsing a meeting that won't happen for 3 hours. We're eating dinner but scrolling through our phones, consuming information while barely tasting food. We're with our children but planning tomorrow's tasks. We're trying to fall asleep but reviewing every awkward thing we said today or imagining catastrophes that might happen tomorrow. We treat the present moment like an inconvenient waiting room for the real life that's always about to begin. Just get through this boring task and then just survive this difficult conversation and then just make it to Friday and then just reach this goal and then. But Thaynet Han's teaching points to something radical. The present moment is not a waiting room. It's your actual life. It's the only place where life happens. The only place where peace is available. The only place where you can actually touch joy or give love or be genuinely helpful. Right now, reading these words, where is your mind? Is it here with these sentences? Or is it planning something, worrying about something, replaying something? And if it's wandering, can you gently bring it back? Not through force, just through recognition. Oh, my mind left. Let me come home to this breath, this moment. Think about Lien, running herself into exhaustion, trying to fix everyone else's suffering, while her own suffering went unattended. How familiar is that? We sacrifice presence for productivity. We sacrifice being for doing. We sacrifice home for the illusion that home is somewhere else, sometime else, in some future where everything is finally fixed. But here's the paradox. Thaynet Han understood. You're more effective when you stop running. A scattered mind creates scattered action. A mind constantly anxious about the future makes anxious, reactive decisions. But a mind that's home, that's here, that's grounded in this breath, that mind can see clearly, can act wisely, can give fully without being depleted. This doesn't mean you stop caring about the future or stop working toward goals. It means you do those things from a foundation of presence rather than from a foundation of perpetual dissatisfaction with now. Try this simple practice they taught Lien. As you breathe in, say silently, I have arrived. As you breathe out, I am home. You might feel resistance. Your mind might say, but I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm just lying in bed trying to sleep. There's nowhere special about this moment. That's exactly the point. You have arrived at this ordinary moment. And this ordinary moment is home. Not because it's perfect or special, but because it's the only place you can ever actually be. The breath is always here. The body is always here. Sounds and sensations are always here. And the awareness experiencing all of this that's always here too. That's the home you can return to any time you notice you've left. Feel the weight of your body now. Notice where it contacts the surface beneath you. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. Hear whatever sounds are present. This is arriving. This is coming home. Not home in some metaphorical sense. Home in the most literal sense. You are here, fully, in this body, in this moment, breathing. Everything else is memory or imagination. This is the only reality there is. And when you live from here, from home, something shifts in your relationship with everything. You're no longer fighting the present moment, wishing it were different. You're meeting life as it actually is, which doesn't mean you stop working for change. It means you work for change from a place of groundedness rather than from a place of scattered desperation. Breathing in, arriving fully in this moment. Breathing out, recognizing this moment as home. Let the breath be simple. Let the arriving be gentle. Let home be this ordinary, precious, never again repeated now. And as you settle into this homecoming, as the body relaxes into its natural resting, we turn now to another story. Another way this ancient wisdom has appeared. In northeastern Thailand in 1968, in the monsoon forests near the Laotian border, there lived a woman named Siriporn whose name meant blessing of beauty, though she felt neither blessed nor beautiful. She was 34 years old, a widow with 2 children, and she was slowly losing her mind to grief. Her husband, Prasert, had died 8 months earlier during the dry season, killed when a tree he was cutting for firewood fell the wrong way. One moment he had been alive, singing while he worked. The next moment he was gone, crushed, bleeding out into the red earth, while Siriporn ran through the village, screaming for help that came too late. The funeral rituals had been performed. The monks had chanted. The village had brought food and comfort. Life, as it insisted on doing, had continued. Her children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7, still needed feeding. The rice still needed planting. The water buffalo still needed tending. And Siriporn moved through these tasks like a ghost, performing each action mechanically, while inside her, something essential had broken and would not mend. But worse than the grief itself was what her mind did with it. Every night, lying alone on the sleeping mat she had shared with Prasert for 12 years, her thoughts would replay the accident in endless variation. What if she had insisted he rest that day? What if she had been there to warn him? What if she had called out just 1 second earlier? What if a torture chamber of alternate histories, none of which could change what had happened? During the day, the thoughts were different, but equally relentless. Memories would ambush her. Prasert, laughing at something foolish she'd said. Prasert, carrying their daughter on his shoulders. Prasert's hands rough and gentle on her skin. And with each memory came a physical pain so acute she sometimes couldn't breathe. How could the world continue spinning when he was gone? How could the sun still rise? How could her heart keep beating when his had stopped? The village elders watched her deteriorating and worried. They suggested she visit Wat Pa Pong, a forest monastery about half a day's walk away, where a teacher named Ajahn Chah was known for his clear and direct way of teaching Dharma to lay people. Maybe the teachings would help. Maybe meditation would bring peace. Siriporn went because she was desperate, not because she had faith. She made the walk on a Tuesday morning, leaving her children with her sister, following the dusty path through rice paddies and into the forest. The monastery was simple, a collection of small huts scattered among the trees, a meditation hall open on all sides, and monks in faded orange robes sweeping paths or sitting in meditation beneath the trees. She asked to speak with Ajahn Chah and was led to a small open-sided hut where the teacher sat on a simple wooden platform. He was perhaps 50 years old, with a round face that seemed perpetually on the verge of smiling, and eyes that were both gentle and completely awake. He looked at Siriporn and seemed to see everything she was carrying without her having to say a word. "You've come from sorrow," he said simply. Siriporn nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Tell me." And she did. She told him about Prasert, about the accident, about the 8 months of grief that wouldn't end, about the thoughts that tortured her day and night, about feeling like she was drowning in her own mind and didn't know how to stop. Ajahn Chah listened without interrupting, his face full of compassion but not pity. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your mind is making you suffer more than the actual loss is making you suffer." Siriporn felt a flash of anger. "My husband died. Of course I'm suffering." "Yes," Ajahn Chah said gently. "Your husband died. And there is pain in that. Natural pain. The pain of love separated from its object. But then, your mind takes that pain and multiplies it 1,000 times. It creates stories. I should have saved him. I could have prevented this. What if I had done something different? My life is over now. I can never be happy again. These stories, these thoughts, they're creating extra suffering on top of the natural pain. Do you see the difference? Sleepful stared at him. She had never thought about it that way. But the thoughts just come. I can't stop them. You can't stop them. Ajahn Chah agreed. But you don't have to believe them. You don't have to be consumed by them. Sit down. Let me teach you something. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor. Close your eyes. Ajahn Chah said, pay attention to your breath. Just watch it coming in and going out. Don't try to control it. Just watch. Sleepful tried, but within seconds, her mind was back with Prasad, replaying the accident, spiraling into what-ifs. The thoughts came. Ajahn Chah said, as if he could see inside her mind. That's fine. That's what minds do. Now, I want you to notice something. There's the thought about your husband, and there's the awareness that knows you're thinking about your husband. Can you feel the difference between the two? Sleepful opened her eyes, confused. Close them again. Ajahn Chah said patiently, when a thought arises, any thought about your husband or about anything, there's the thought itself. And there's something that knows the thought is happening. The thought comes and goes. But the knowing that awareness, is it also coming and going? Or is it always there? Simply registering whatever passes through? Sleepful sat with this. A thought arose. I miss him so much. And yes, there was something that knew that thought was happening. The thought felt heavy, painful, but the knowing of it that felt different. Lighter, more spacious. This awareness, Ajahn Chah continued, is your true mind. In Buddhist teaching, we call it your original nature. It's like a clear pool of water. When you drop a stone in the water, ripples form. The ripples are your thoughts and emotions. They arise. They move across the surface. They fade away. But the water itself? The water is always clear, always pure, always the same. Your grief is the ripples, but you the awareness, the knowing you're the water. But the ripples hurt, Sleepful whispered. Yes, they do. And it's okay to feel them. The practice isn't about getting rid of the ripples. The practice is about recognizing that you're the water, not the ripples. Right now, you think you are the grief. You think you are the thoughts. But actually, you're the space in which the grief appears. You're the awareness that knows the thoughts are happening. He paused, letting this sink in. Then he said, let me tell you something about this mind of yours. In its true nature, it's already peaceful. It's already whole. It doesn't need fixing. The grief, the thoughts, the painful memories, these are like clouds passing through the sky. The clouds don't damage the sky. They just pass through. And the sky remains the sky, vast and clear. Whether the clouds are there or not. Sleepful felt tears rolling down her face. How do I find that sky? How do I get there? You don't get there, Ajahn Chah said, and his voice was very gentle now. You're already there. You've always been there. You just forgot because you've been so identified with the clouds. The practice is simply returning to the recognition, again and again. Every time you notice you've been lost in thoughts, lost in suffering, lost in stories, that moment of noticing, that is the sky recognizing itself. That is your original mind waking up. He taught her a simple practice. Whenever thoughts about prasad arose, which they would, constantly, she should silently say to herself, thinking, just thinking, not to push the thoughts away, but to recognize them as thoughts rather than as reality itself, to create a little space between the awareness and the thought. Right now, Ajahn Chah said, you believe your thoughts absolutely. When your mind says, I should have saved him, you believe that's true. When it says, my life is over, you believe that too. But these are just thoughts, just mental formations. They arise, they have their moment, and they pass away. They're not the truth. They're just ripples on the water. Siriporn practiced right there in the hut. A thought would arise, I can't live without him. She would notice it, thinking, just thinking. Another thought, it's all my fault. She would note it, thinking, just thinking. At first it felt mechanical, even silly. But gradually, something shifted. The thoughts didn't disappear, but there was a tiny gap between them and her identification with them. She was watching them happen rather than being completely consumed by them. This gap, Ajahn Chah said, this is freedom. Not freedom from having thoughts, you'll have thoughts your whole life. Freedom from being trapped by them. Freedom to let them come and let them go without being destroyed by every one that passes through. Over the following weeks and months, Siriporn returned to Wat Pa Pong whenever she could. Sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, depending on her work in the fields and her children's needs. Ajahn Chah continued teaching her, always bringing her back to the same fundamental point. Your mind is intrinsically pure, like the sky, like clear water. The suffering is what passes through, not what you are. Look at your children, he said during one visit. When your son falls and scrapes his knee, he cries. Big tears, loud sobs. It hurts, genuinely hurts. But then 10 minutes later, what happens? He's playing again, Siriporn said. Exactly. The pain came, at its moment, and passed away. His mind returned to its natural state, open, curious, playful, ready for life. Adult minds are the same, but we add all this extra suffering on top. We think the pain should last forever. We think we shouldn't feel anything else until we've resolved this pain completely. We make suffering into an identity. I am a grieving widow. And then we can't let it go even when it naturally wants to pass. Because letting it go feels like betraying the person we lost. This hit Siriporn hard. Was she holding on to grief because she thought letting it go meant forgetting Prasad? Was she afraid that if she felt joy again, it meant his death didn't matter? Letting the grief flow through you, Ajahn Chah said gently, doesn't mean you stop loving your husband. It means you honor him by continuing to live fully, by being present for your children, by allowing your mind to return to its natural state of peace and openness. He wouldn't want you destroyed by his death. He'd want you whole. Slowly, over many months, Siriporn began to change. The grief still came in waves, in moments, triggered by a smell or a sound or a memory. But increasingly, she could feel it without being obliterated by it. She could watch the wave come, feel its intensity, and watch it pass. knowing that the wave was not who she was. She was the ocean that held all the waves, the sky that held all the weather. She found she could be sad in one moment and laugh at her daughter's joke in the next, without feeling guilty. She found she could remember Prasad with love instead of only with agony. She found that her mind, when she wasn't torturing it with should-haves and what-ifs, actually had long stretches of simple peace working in the fields, preparing food, sitting in the evening light. One day, nearly 2 years after Prasad's death, Siriporn was walking back from Wat Pa Pong through the forest. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees in golden shafts. Birds called to each other. The air smelled of wet earth and jasmine, and Siriporn realized, with a start of recognition, that she felt happy. Not manic, or forced, or guilty. Just happy. Present. Alive. The grief hadn't disappeared. It was still there, folded into her life like a familiar sorrow. But it no longer defined her. It was something she carried, not something that carried her away. And the mind that held it her awareness, her original nature, what Ajahn Chah called the one who knows that remained peaceful, spacious, unbroken by any thought or feeling that passed through it. Years later, when Siriporn was old and her children were grown with children of their own, she would sometimes tell this story to other widows in the village, other people broken by loss. She would sit with them and say, simply, "Your mind is like clear water. The grief is like mud stirred up in that water. It clouds everything, makes everything dark and turbid. But if you stop stirring, if you stop adding more and more thoughts to the grief, the mud will settle, and the water will become clear again. Not because the mud disappeared, but because it found its natural resting place at the bottom. The water was always clear. You were always whole. You just forgot." And some would hear her, and some would not. And that was fine too, because the teaching was there whenever anyone was ready to receive it. This pattern believing we are our thoughts and emotions rather than the awareness that experiences them. It might be the fundamental confusion of human existence. We think we're the storm when actually we're the sky. We think we're the waves when actually we're the ocean. We think we're the thoughts and feelings when actually we're the awareness in which thoughts and feelings arise. Right now, notice, there are thoughts happening. Maybe thoughts about this teaching. Maybe thoughts about your day tomorrow. Maybe worries or plans or memories. And there's awareness of those thoughts. Can you sense the difference? The thoughts change constantly. But the awareness has that changed? Or is it the unchanging background against which all change occurs? This isn't some advanced spiritual attainment. This is your actual nature right now. You've never not been this awareness. You've just been so identified with the contents of awareness, the thoughts, emotions, sensations, stories that you forgot the awareness itself. Ajahn Chah would often say, "The mind is intrinsically pure." Not pure in a moralistic sense. Pure meaning unconditioned, untouched, like the sky is untouched by weather. Whatever thoughts arise, angry thoughts, sad thoughts, confused thoughts, they don't stain the awareness that knows them. They just pass through. Think about your most persistent worry, your biggest regret, your deepest pain. Now notice, there's that thought, feeling, and there's the awareness of it. The thought, feeling, has a quality heavy, tight, painful. But the awareness itself, does that have a quality? Or is it simply there, spaciously holding whatever arises, neither accepting nor rejecting, just knowing This recognition, this is the backward step. Not going somewhere, not achieving something, simply recognizing what you already are. The awareness, the knowing, the clear water underneath all the ripples. And when you rest as this awareness, something extraordinary happens. The ripples don't stop, thoughts and feelings continue arising. But you're no longer tossed about by every wave. There's a stability, a groundedness, a sense of being home in yourself no matter what's happening. The grief can be there. The fear can be there. The confusion can be there. And you can be there too, holding it all in spacious awareness, neither consumed by it nor pushing it away. Just letting it be what it is, weather passing through the sky, ripples moving across the water. Let your breath settle now. Feel your body resting. Notice whatever sounds are present. All of this is arising in awareness. And that awareness, that's what you are. Not the changing contents. The unchanging context in which contents appear. Your original mind is already here, already peaceful, already whole. You don't need to create it or earn it or become worthy of it. You just need to recognize it, right now. This awareness that's reading these words, that's breathing, that's being home. You're already home. You've always been home. The backward step is realizing you never left. Feel this recognition softening in your chest, settling like fine dust after a storm. And as the body naturally releases into sleep, we turn to another story, another way this timeless truth has been remembered. In 16th century Japan, in the final years before Toyotomi Hideyoshi would unite the warring provinces into a single nation, there lived in Kyoto a young potter named Kenji. He was 28 years old, unmarried, and completely obsessed with perfection. Kenji had apprenticed under his father, who had apprenticed under his grandfather, who had apprenticed under one of the great ceramic masters of the previous generation. The family workshop produced tea bowls, sake vessels, flower vases, and serving dishes for wealthy merchants and minor nobility. Their pottery was known throughout Kyoto for its precise symmetry, its flawless glazes, and its technical excellence. Every piece that left their workshop was perfect, or as close to perfect as human hands could achieve. But Kenji took this family tradition to an extreme that worried even his father. He would spend 12, 14, 16 hours a day at the potter's wheel, trying to create pieces that met his exacting standards. For every bowl he kept, he would smash 3 or 4 others, finding a microscopic wobble in the rim, a barely visible unevenness in the thickness, a glaze that pooled just slightly too much in one spot. His father would watch these perfectly serviceable pieces shatter on the workshop floor and shake his head, but Kenji couldn't stop himself. If a piece wasn't perfect, it was worthless. If it wasn't flawless, it was a failure. This perfectionism bled into every corner of Kenji's life. His small room above the workshop was kept meticulously clean, every object in its proper place. His clothes were always spotless. His hair was always perfectly combed. Even his handwriting, which he practiced daily, copying Buddhist sutras, had to be immaculate. Each character formed with mathematical precision. Any page with the slightest smudge or uneven ink would be torn up and discarded. The problem was that perfection, it turned out, was lonely. Kenji had no close friends. Women found him intimidating, too rigid, too critical, unable to relax or laugh at himself. His fellow potters respected his skill but avoided working with him because nothing they did was ever good enough by his standards. Even his father had stopped trying to have real conversations with him. Exhausted by Kenji's constant criticism and inability to simply be at ease with the world as it was. One evening in late autumn, when the maple trees were turning brilliant red and gold, Kenji's father suggested they visit a tea ceremony being held by a master named Sen no Rikyu at a small house on the outskirts of the city. Rikyu was becoming famous among Kyoto's elite, transforming the ornate Chinese-influenced tea ceremony into something simpler, more rustic, more profoundly Japanese. Kenji had heard of him but dismissed him as a foolish reformer who probably didn't understand real craftsmanship. Still, he went with his father, if only to satisfy his curiosity. The tea house was remarkably humble, a small thatched roof structure with rough plastered walls, a low doorway that required guests to bow as they entered, and an interior so simple it was almost austere. A single flower, just one, sat in a bamboo vase in the alcove. The floor was covered with simple tatami mats. Everything was natural, unadorned, almost plain. Rikyu himself was perhaps 60 years old, with a weathered face and hands that moved with quiet confidence. He greeted the guests with a slight bow and invited them to sit. The other guests were a mix of samurai, merchants, and artists, all of them watching Rikyu with a kind of reverent attention that Kenji found puzzling. What was so special about this old man? Then Rikyu began preparing the tea, and Kenji found himself transfixed despite his skepticism. The tea bowl Rikyu used was nothing like the perfectly symmetrical, flawlessly glazed pieces Kenji's family produced. It was rough, irregular, with a thick rim that wasn't quite level. The glaze was mottled and uneven, with bare patches showing the reddish-brown clay beneath. It looked more like something a peasant might have made in a village kiln than something that should be used in a formal tea ceremony. And yet, and this confused Kenji deeply, the bowl was beautiful. Not in spite of its imperfections, but somehow because of them. The irregular shape fit naturally in Rikyu's weathered hands. The rough texture invited touch. The uneven glaze caught the afternoon light in unpredictable ways, creating subtle patterns of light and shadow that shifted as the bowl moved. It had character, presence, a kind of dignity that Kenji's technically perfect pieces somehow lacked. Rikyu moved through the ceremony with unhurried grace. Every gesture was simple, economical, exactly what was needed, and nothing more. He scooped the powdered tea with a bamboo spoon that was slightly worn, its surface polished by years of use. He whisked the tea with a whisk whose bristles were no longer perfectly straight. He wiped the bowl with a cloth that showed the faint stains of countless previous ceremonies. Nothing was perfect. Everything was exactly right. After the ceremony, as guests lingered to talk and admire the few objects in the tea room, Kenji approached Rikyu. His throat was tight with something he couldn't quite name: confusion, fascination, a kind of desperate need to understand what he had just witnessed. "Master Rikyu," he said, his voice coming out more abrupt than he intended. "I'm a potter. My family makes tea bowls. Ours are..." He paused, struggling with words. "Ours are perfect, symmetrical, flawless. But your bowl today, it was rough, uneven, imperfect. And yet everyone here seemed to treasure it. I don't understand." Rikyu looked at him with eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully maintained facade. "Tell me about your work," he said simply. And Kenji found himself talking about his training, his standards, his relentless pursuit of perfection, about the hours spent on a single piece, The dozens of bowls smashed because they didn't meet his exacting criteria, about his conviction that anything less than flawless was worthless. That imperfection was shameful. That true mastery meant eliminating every trace of human error. Rikyu listened without interrupting. When Kenji finally fell silent, exhausted by his own confession, Rikyu said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." They walked out into the tea garden, a small walled space with a path of stepping stones, a stone basin for washing hands, and a few carefully placed rocks and plants. The garden had clearly just been swept clean. The path was spotless, every stone perfectly visible, every fallen leaf removed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Rikyu said. Kenji nodded. It was immaculate. Then Rikyu walked to a nearby maple tree, reached up, and shook one of its branches. A cascade of red and gold leaves tumbled down, scattering across the freshly swept path. Kenji felt a spike of distress. The perfection had been ruined. The clean path was now littered with leaves, the symmetry broken, the order disrupted. But Rikyu was smiling. "Now," he said softly, "now it's beautiful." He led Kenji to a stone bench at the edge of the garden and sat down, gesturing for the young potter to join him. "There's a word," Rikyu said, "that's becoming central to how I think about tea, about beauty, about life itself. Wabi-sabi. Have you heard it?" Kenji shook his head. "Wabi," Rikyu explained, "speaks to the beauty of simplicity, of being alone with nature, of finding richness in austerity. Sabi speaks to the beauty that comes with time, with wear, with the patina of age. Together, they point to something profound, that beauty isn't found in perfection, but in imperfection, not in what's permanent, but in what's transient, not in what's complete, but in what's incomplete." He gestured to the leaf-scattered path. A perfectly swept path is the work of human hands trying to impose order on nature. But life isn't orderly. The seasons change. Leaves fall. Things decay and are reborn. When I shook that tree, I wasn't ruining the garden's beauty. I was completing it. I was allowing it to be what it actually is, alive, changing, natural, real. Kenji stared at the scattered leaves, his mind struggling to reorganize around this completely different way of seeing. "The tea bowl I used today," Rikyu continued, "was made by a Korean potter 200 years ago. It wasn't made for tea ceremony. It was probably a rice bowl, used daily by a peasant family. The rim is uneven because it was made quickly, by hand, without fuss. The glaze is irregular because the kiln fire was unpredictable. Over time, the bowl has been used, handled, lived with. It bears the marks of its history, tiny chips, worn spots where countless hands have held it, a small crack that's been repaired with gold lacquer." "You repaired it?" Kenji asked, startled. "Why not just replace it?" Rikyu smiled. "That crack, repaired with gold, we call that kintsugi, makes the bowl more beautiful, not less. It tells a story. It shows that the bowl has lived, has been broken, has been mended. The repair doesn't hide the break. It celebrates it. It says, this bowl was broken, and now it's whole again, and the breaking and mending are part of its beauty." He looked directly at Kenji. "Your perfect bowls, they're technically flawless. Any craftsman would admire the skill they demonstrate. But they lack something essential. They lack humanity." They lack the touch of the maker's hand. They're so perfect, they could have been made by anyone or by no one. They don't breathe. They don't live. Kenji felt something crack open inside his chest, not breaking. Exactly, but opening. But if I don't aim for perfection, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, what do I aim for? Truth. Rikyu said simply, naturalness. The honest expression of materials being worked by human hands. When you make a bowl, your hands know more than your mind does. They know the weight of the clay, the moisture content, the way the wheel spins. If you let your hands work without your mind constantly judging and correcting, something alive can emerge. Something that shows the marriage between your skill and the clay's nature. Something imperfect and true and beautiful. They sat in silence for a while, watching the leaves drift and settle in the garden. In Zen, Rikyu said eventually, there's a teaching about the 3 marks of existence. Impermanence, everything changes. Suffering because we resist that change. Non-self, because there's no fixed, permanent me, separate from the flowing river of existence. Wabi-sabi is this teaching made visible. My tea ceremony, this garden, that bowl, they're all expressions of impermanence, embraced rather than feared, of change accepted rather than resisted. He stood up, brushing leaf fragments from his robe. Come back next week. Bring one of your technically perfect bowls. And also bring one that you make this week without trying to be perfect. Just make a bowl. Let it be what it wants to be. Show me both, and we'll talk again. That week was torment for Kenji. Making his usual bowls felt hollow now, mechanical, but making a bowl without aiming for perfection felt like stepping off a cliff into emptiness. How could he not aim for perfection? What was the point of skill if not to eliminate flaws? But he tried. He sat at the wheel with a lump of clay, took 3 deep breaths to quiet his racing mind, and then just began. Instead of visualizing the perfect bowl before he started, he let his hands find their own way. Instead of constantly measuring with his eyes to ensure perfect symmetry, he felt the clay's response under his fingers. Instead of stopping every few seconds to check for flaws, he let the bowl emerge in one continuous motion, start to finish, following some deeper knowing than his judging mind could access. The bowl that emerged was nothing like his usual work. The rim was slightly uneven, not badly, but visibly. The walls varied in thickness. The shape was organic rather than geometric, with subtle curves and a base that sat firmly but not perfectly centered. He almost smashed it out of pure habit. But something stopped him. He let it dry. He glazed it with a simple ash glaze that he knew would be unpredictable. He fired it alongside his other work. And when he pulled it from the kiln, he stared at it for a long time. It was imperfect. Undeniably imperfect. The glaze had run more on one side than the other. There was a small mark on the rim where a piece of kiln debris had stuck during firing. The color was mottled darker in some areas, lighter in others. And it was alive. It breathed. It had presence. It looked like human hands had made it with love rather than with fear. It looked true. The following week, Kenji returned to Rikyu's tea house, carrying both bowls wrapped carefully in cloth. Rikyu unwrapped them both, held each one in turn, turned them slowly to examine them from every angle. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, he set down the technically perfect bowl. This, he said, is a bowl made by a mind that fears mistakes. It's flawless, yes, but it's also fearful. I can feel the fear in every line, every angle. The fear of being wrong, of being judged, of failing to measure up. He picked up the imperfect bowl, held it in both hands. A smile spread slowly across his face. "This," he said softly, "is a bowl made by hands that trusted themselves. Not perfectly, you were still thinking too much, still worried, but you trusted enough to let the bowl become what it wanted to become. And look." He ran his finger along the slightly uneven rim. "This irregularity isn't a flaw. It's the bowl's signature. It's what makes this bowl different from every other bowl that has ever been made or ever will be made. It's proof that a particular person, on a particular day, worked with a particular piece of clay. It's honest." Rikyu used Kenji's imperfect bowl in that day's tea ceremony. And Kenji watched how the guests responded to it, not with the polite admiration they gave to technically excellent pieces, but with something warmer, more intimate. They held it gently. They smiled as they turned it in their hands. They saw the human being who had made it, not just the object itself. After the ceremony, Rikyu said, "Perfection is a kind of death. It's the end of becoming. But life is about continuing to become, continuing to change, continuing to grow. Your perfect bowls were dead the moment you finished them, because there was nowhere for them to go. They had already arrived at perfection, which meant they could only remain static or deteriorate. But this bowl," he held up the imperfect one, "this bowl will continue to live. Every time it's used, it will change slightly, gathering marks, wearing smooth in certain spots, developing a patina from countless hands. It will age, which means it will become more beautiful, not less. It will gather a history." In the months and years that followed, Kenji's work transformed. He still practiced technical skill. There's a difference between natural imperfection and sloppy work, but he stopped trying to eliminate every trace of the human hand from his pieces. He let bowls be slightly asymmetrical. He used rougher glazes that were less predictable. He stopped smashing pieces that didn't meet some imaginary standard, and instead learned to see what each piece actually was rather than what it failed to be. His work became sought after by tea masters throughout Kyoto, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was alive. Because it showed the honest meeting between skilled hands and responsive clay. Because each piece was unique, bearing the signature of its making in every line and curve. And something else changed too. As Kenji stopped demanding perfection from his pots, he stopped demanding it from himself, from his father, from the people around him. He could laugh now when he made a mistake. He could appreciate a friend's quirks instead of being irritated by them. He could sit in his workshop at the end of the day, surrounded by drying pots with their various asymmetries and irregularities, and feel deep contentment rather than the anxious striving that had characterized his earlier years. Years later, when Kenji was an old man himself, training his own apprentices, he would sometimes tell them about the day Rikyu shook the maple tree and scattered leaves across the perfect garden path. "That was the day," he would say, "I learned that completion includes incompletion. That wholeness includes brokenness. That beauty lives in the cracks, in the irregular places, in the marks that time and use leave behind. Perfection is what we think we want. But what we actually need, what actually nourishes us, is the honest, imperfect, changing, living truth of things as they are. This teaching that we must accept imperfection rather than constantly striving to eliminate it might be one of the hardest lessons for modern people to learn. We live in an age of filters and editing. of constant self-improvement projects, of performance and presentation. We're taught from childhood that mistakes are shameful, that flaws should be hidden, that we're only valuable when we're excellent. But this creates a kind of exhausting armor we have to wear every day. We can never rest. We can never just be ourselves, imperfect and changing and real. We're always performing perfection, which is exhausting and ultimately impossible because perfection doesn't actually exist in human life. Right now, think about something you judge as imperfect about yourself. Maybe it's your body, that extra weight, those wrinkles, those scars. Maybe it's your personality, your tendency to worry, your social awkwardness, your impatience. Maybe it's your past, those mistakes you made, those times you failed, those relationships you couldn't save. Now ask yourself, what if these imperfections aren't flaws that need fixing? What if they're more like the uneven rim on Kenji's tea bowl, the signature of your particular journey, the evidence that you've lived and learned and been shaped by experience? What if they're what make you distinctly you rather than some generic, perfect version of a human being? Wabi-sabi teaches that the crack repaired with gold is more beautiful than an object that has never broken. The wound you healed from might have made you more compassionate. The failure you survived might have taught you resilience. The imperfect body you inhabit might be carrying you faithfully through this precious life, despite everything you've asked of it. What if you could look at yourself the way Rikyu looked at that old Korean rice bowl, seeing the marks of time and use, not as damage, but as character, as beauty, as proof of a life fully lived? What if instead of constantly trying to smooth away every rough edge, you could appreciate the rough edges as part of what makes you real, alive, authentic? This doesn't mean giving up on growth or change. Kenji didn't stop practicing his craft, he just stopped letting the pursuit of flawlessness prevent him from creating anything real. You can still work on yourself, still develop skills, still become kinder and wiser, without making your self-worth dependent on achieving some imaginary state of perfection that doesn't actually exist. Let your breath settle naturally in your chest. Feel the weight of your body resting. Notice that, right here, right now, imperfect and incomplete as you are whole. You are enough. And as sleep gently calls you, we turn to another story of recognition. On the vast grasslands of Mongolia in the 18th century, where the sky stretched endlessly in every direction and the horizon seemed to curve with the earth's roundness, there lived a young herder named Bata. His name meant hero, though he didn't feel heroic. Mostly he felt small, impossibly, crushingly small beneath the immensity of the steppe. Bata was 23 years old, the youngest son in a family of nomadic herders who moved their jurs. Their round felt tense with the seasons, following grass and water. His father and older brothers were confident men, comfortable in the endless openness, able to navigate by stars and wind and the subtle changes in the grass under their horses' hooves. But Bata, despite having lived his entire life on these plains, felt perpetually lost. Not geographically lost, though that happened too. Existentially lost. He would lie awake at night in the jur, listening to his family's breathing, staring up at the smoke hole where stars blazed with an intensity that felt almost violent. And he would think, who am I? What am I? Why am I this particular cluster of thoughts and feelings and not someone else? Why am I anything at all? These questions tormented him. During the day, herding sheep across the grasslands, he would become so absorbed in these existential spirals that he'd lose track of the flock. At night, unable to sleep, he'd replay every conversation he'd had that day, analyzing his words, cringing at things he'd said, constructing elaborate narratives about what people must think of him. He was constantly narrating his own life to himself, constantly commenting on his experience, constantly judging whether he was doing life correctly or failing at it. The worst part was that he couldn't seem to stop. It was as if there were two Bartas, the one living life and the one watching and judging the one living life. And sometimes there was a third Bata watching the second Bata watch the first Bata. And the whole thing became dizzying and exhausting, and he just wanted his mind to be quiet for once, to experience things directly without this constant internal commentary. His family noticed his distraction, his melancholy, his tendency to drift off mid-conversation. His mother worried. His father thought he was lazy. His brothers teased him for being too serious, too much in his head. "You think too much," they'd say. "Just ride your horse. Just tend the sheep. Why do you make everything so complicated?" But Bata didn't know how to not think too much. Thinking was what he did. Worrying was who he was. Or was it? This uncertainty about whether his thoughts were him or just something happening to him was itself another thought to worry about. In the autumn of his 23rd year, when the family had moved their camp to the southern grasslands for the winter, an old lama arrived at their jer. He was traveling alone on horseback, visiting the scattered herding families, teaching Dharma to whoever would listen. Bata's mother invited him in with the customary hospitality, offering him tea with salt and butter, dried cheese, and a place by the fire. The lama's name was Dorje, and he had a face like weathered leather, deeply lined but somehow peaceful. His eyes were clear and direct, and when he looked at you, he really looked not at your surface, but at something deeper. When those eyes landed on Bata, the young man felt simultaneously exposed and understood. After the meal, as the family settled around the fire, Dorje began to speak about Buddhist teachings. He talked about impermanence, about suffering, about the nature of mind. Bata's family listened politely, though his brothers clearly found it boring and his father kept nodding off. But Bata was transfixed. When Dorje finished, Bata found himself speaking without meaning to. "Lama, I have a question. I don't know who I am. I mean, I know I'm Bata, son of Temujin, herder of sheep, but underneath all that, underneath the name and the role, who is the one thinking these thoughts? Who is the one aware of being aware? When I try to find myself, all I find are thoughts and feelings and sensations, but I can never find the actual me having them. Does that make sense?" Dorje's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement or compassion or both. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. "I want to show you something." The next morning, Bata rode out with Dorje into the vastness of the steppe. They rode for hours in silence, the grasslands rolling away in every direction, yellow gold in the autumn sun, broken only occasionally by rocky outcrops or distant herds of gazelle. The sky was a blue so deep it hurt to look at, with white clouds piled on the horizon like distant mountains. Finally, in the early afternoon, they came to a place where there was nothing, just grass and sky meeting at the horizon in every direction. No gers, no animals, no trees, no rocks, just space. Endless, empty, perfect space. Dorje dismounted and gestured for Bata to do the same. They stood there on the grass, horses grazing quietly nearby, the wind moving across the plain in visible waves. "Tell me," Dorje said, "what do you see?" Bata looked around. "I see grass, sky, space, nothing, really. just openness. Good. Now tell me, where does the sky begin and end? Bata looked up. The sky was everywhere, surrounding him completely. It doesn't. I mean, it begins at the horizon, but the horizon moves as I move. If I walked for 100 days, I'd never reach the edge of the sky. It's boundless. Yes. And what is the nature of the sky? Bata considered this. It's empty, clear. It has no form, no solidity. Clouds pass through it but don't change it. Birds fly through it but don't damage it. It's always just there. Spacious. Doria nodded. Now close your eyes. Bata closed his eyes. Notice your breathing, Doria said. Notice the sensations in your body. Notice the sounds, the wind, the horses, my voice. Notice the thoughts arising in your mind. Bata did all this. He felt the wind on his face, heard the horses munching grass, felt his heartbeat. Noticed thoughts arising. This is strange. What is he getting at? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be experiencing. Now, Dorje continued, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. Notice the awareness that knows all of this. The awareness that knows you're breathing, that hears the wind, that notices thoughts arising. Where is that awareness located? Does it have a boundary? Can you find an edge to it? Bata tried to locate his awareness. Was it in his head, behind his eyes? But no, he was aware of his head, aware of his eyes, which meant the awareness must be larger than those things, containing them. Was it in his body? But he was aware of his body, which meant awareness must be bigger than body. Where was it? And suddenly, very suddenly, like a shift in perspective that happened all at once, Bata realized he couldn't find an edge to his awareness. It was like the sky. It was vast, spacious, containing everything he experienced, but not contained by anything. Open your eyes, Doria said. Bata opened them. The world looked different, somehow brighter, more vivid, more immediate. The grass, the sky, the horse, Dorje's weathered face, all of it was appearing in awareness, like clouds appearing in the sky. Your question, Doria said, was, who am I? But this question assumes you are a thing, an object that can be found and identified. What if you're not a thing? What if you're the space in which things appear? Bata felt something crack open in his understanding. You mean, like the sky? Yes. Like the sky. Your true nature. What Buddhists call your Buddha nature. Your original mind is like the sky. Vast, clear, spacious, unchanging. All your thoughts, all your feelings, all your experiences, these are like weather passing through the sky. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's stormy, sometimes clouds obscure the blue. But the sky itself? The sky is always the sky. It doesn't become the clouds. It's not damaged by the storm. It simply allows everything to appear and disappear within its spaciousness. Bata stood very still, feeling this. The wind moved across the grass. A hawk circled high above, and he could actually feel, that these experiences were arising in a vast, spacious awareness that was him, not him, both, neither, but Lama. He said, if I'm the sky, then why do I feel so small? Why do I feel like this tight, anxious? worried person trapped inside this body? Because, Dorje said gently, you've been identifying with the clouds instead of the sky. You think you are your thoughts. You think you are your feelings. You think you are the story of Bata who thinks too much and can't find himself. But thoughts are not the thinker. Feelings are not the feeler. The story is not the awareness in which the story appears. He gestured to the vast space around them. Out here on the steppe, you can see clearly. The landscape is too big for confusion, but in your daily life, surrounded by your family and your work and your constant thinking, you've forgotten your spaciousness. You've shrunk yourself down to the size of your thoughts. You've identified with the weather and forgotten you're the sky. They sat down on the grass, and Dorje continued teaching. When a thought arises, let's say the thought, I'm not good enough, where does it appear? In my mind, Bata said automatically. But what is mind? Can you find it? Can you point to it? Bata couldn't. Mind wasn't a thing he could locate. Thoughts appear in awareness, Dorje said. They arise like clouds forming in empty sky. And what happens to them? They pass away. Eventually, yes, they arise. They have their moment. They dissolve back into spaciousness. They never actually touch the awareness itself. A cloud doesn't stain the sky. An angry thought doesn't damage your true nature. A worried thought doesn't diminish your fundamental spaciousness. But it feels like it does. Bata protested. When I'm anxious, I feel small and tight and trapped. Yes, because in that moment, you're identified with the anxiety. You think you are the anxiety. But actually, look closely, there's the anxiety, arising like a storm. And there's the awareness that knows this is anxiety. The awareness itself isn't anxious. It's just spaciously holding the experience of anxiety. Dorje picked up a handful of grass and released it. The blades scattered on the wind, some landing nearby, some blown away to disappear into the vastness. Your thoughts and feelings are like this grass. They arise from the earth of your conditioning, your past, your family, your fears. They're released into the wind of circumstance. Some stay close, some blow away. But the space through which they move, that doesn't change. That's always here. That's what you actually are. They stayed on the steppe all afternoon, Dorje teaching and Bata listening, and, more importantly, resting in direct experience of spacious awareness. Every time Bata would get lost in thought, spinning off into worry or self-analysis, Dorje would gently bring him back. Notice your thinking. Don't fight the thought. Don't try to stop it. Just notice it's happening. And notice the spaciousness that knows it's happening. Rest as that spaciousness. It was hard at first. Bata kept collapsing back into identification with his thoughts. But gradually, over the course of that afternoon, something loosened. It was as if he'd been clenching a fist his whole life and was finally learning to relax his grip. As the sun moved toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose, they prepared to ride back to camp. Before they mounted their horses, Dorje said, "One more thing. Look at the horizon. What do you see? Grass and sky meeting. Do they really meet? Or does it just appear that way from here?" Bata looked more carefully. "I suppose they don't actually meet. It just looks like they do. If I walk to that line, it would keep moving away from me." Yes. The horizon is an optical illusion created by your position. And the boundary between you and the world, the line you think separates me in here from everything else out there, that's also an illusion. In reality, there's just one vast spaciousness, awareness, and everything your body, your thoughts, the grass, the sky, other people, other beings, all of it is appearing within this one awareness. There's no actual separation, only the appearance of separation. Like the horizon, they rode back to camp in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the morning's ride. The morning silence had been full of Bata's usual mental chatter. This evening, silence was spacious, peaceful, like the grassland itself had entered his mind and opened it up from the inside. That night, lying in the chair, Bata looked up through the smoke hole at the stars. Usually, the vastness of the night sky made him feel small and insignificant. But tonight, he had a different experience. The vastness wasn't out there separate from him. The spaciousness of the sky and the spaciousness of the awareness perceiving the sky were somehow the same spaciousness. He wasn't a small thing looking at a big thing. He was vast, spacious awareness within which both Bata and stars were appearing. The thoughts still came, of course they did. The worry, the self-doubt, the existential questioning. But now there was a subtle difference. He could feel that these thoughts were weather, not sky. They were clouds passing through, not the spaciousness itself. And somehow, just that recognition, just that tiny shift in perspective, made everything less crushing, less overwhelming. Dorje stayed with Bata's family for several more days. And each day he and Bata would go out onto the steppe for more teaching. Gradually, Bata learned to rest more easily in spacious awareness, to not be so immediately identified with every thought and feeling that arose. He learned that he didn't have to fight his thoughts or fix his feelings. He just had to remember the sky. Years later, when Bata was older and had his own family, his children would sometimes complain about feeling small or lost or confused. And he would take them out onto the steppe, just as Dorje had taken him. And he would ask them, "What do you see?" And they would say, "Grass, sky, space." And he would say, "Yes, and that's what you are. Not the small, worried version of yourself that lives in your thoughts. You're the vast, spacious awareness in which all experience arises. Remember the sky. No matter what weather passes through your life, happiness or sadness, success or failure, comfort or pain, remember, you're the sky, not the weather. The sky is always spacious. The sky is always clear. The sky is always home." This teaching about spaciousness, about recognizing that we are the vast open awareness in which experience arises, rather than the small separate self we imagine ourselves to be, addresses something fundamental about human suffering. We spend our lives defending and promoting and worrying about this self, this identity, this me. But what if there is no separate solid self? What if there's just spacious awareness? And the sense of being a separate bounded person is a kind of optical illusion. Like the horizon, right now, notice your experience. There are sounds. There are sensations in your body. There are thoughts. And there's the awareness that knows all of this. That awareness, can you find an edge to it? Can you locate where it begins and ends? Or is it more like space itself, boundless, clear, simply present? We're so used to thinking of ourselves as the contents of awareness, as the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the story of who we are. But what if we're actually the container, not the contents? What if we're the space, not the things appearing in space? This doesn't mean you disappear. It means you realize you're much bigger than you thought. Bigger than your worries. Bigger than your story. Bigger than the particular personality structure you've been identified with. You're the vast openness in which all of life arises, plays out, and dissolves. And this openness, this spaciousness, it's not empty in a nihilistic way. It's empty like the sky is empty. Clear, alive, irradiant, allowing everything, containing everything, damaged by nothing. Clouds don't diminish the sky. Your difficult thoughts don't diminish your true nature. Your painful feelings don't reduce your fundamental spaciousness. They just pass through, like weather, while the sky remains forever untouched. Let your attention rest in the spaciousness of this moment. The breath moving in open space. Thoughts arising and dissolving in open space. The body resting in vast awareness. No need to be anywhere else. No need to become anything other than this openness you already are. And as sleep naturally approaches, let yourself dissolve into spaciousness. Like clouds dissolving into the evening sky. In 9th century Java, when mist still clung to the valleys, each dawn and the great temple of Borobudur was newly completed, there lived a woman named Dewi, whose name meant goddess, but who felt anything but divine. She was 37 years old, a widow, a mother of grown children, and she was tired, bone tired, soul tired, tired in ways that sleep couldn't cure. Her husband had died 3 years earlier, struck down by fever. Her children had married and moved to distant villages. She lived alone now in a small house near the rice terraces, weaving cloth to trade for food, watching the seasons turn, feeling time move through her like water through a sieve. Everything flowed past. Nothing stayed. And she was so tired of the flowing. One morning, she woke before dawn with a feeling she couldn't name. Not urgency. Exactly. Not quite peace. Something else. A pull, perhaps. A quiet invitation written in the quality of the air itself. She rose from her sleeping mat, wrapped a sarong around her waist, and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. Her feet knew where they wanted to go before her mind did. North. Toward the mountain. Toward the temple. Borobudur rose from the valley floor like a mountain made of stone and faith, its 9 ascending levels disappearing into the morning mist. Dewi had seen it many times. From a distance, everyone in the region had watched it, being built over the decades. Stone by stone. Relief by relief. But she had never climbed it. That was for monks and nobles and pilgrims with spiritual aspirations. Not for tired widows who just wanted the aching to stop. But this morning, she climbed. The base level was carved with images of desire and suffering people caught in the wheel of craving, faces twisted with passion or fear or hunger. Dewi barely looked at them. She had lived those images. She didn't need stone to show her what desire and suffering looked like. She moved up to the first gallery, where relief panels told the story of the Buddha's lives, his past incarnations, his good deeds, his journey toward awakening. Other pilgrims were already here, walking slowly clockwise around the temple, murmuring prayers or mantras. Dewi followed them, her bare feet on the cool stone, the morning air soft against her skin. She didn't think about enlightenment. She didn't think about Buddhism or doctrine or spiritual attainment. She just walked, one foot, then the other, around and around the gallery, following the path that thousands had walked before her and thousands would walk after. The second gallery, more stories. The Buddha teaching, healing, showing compassion. The stone carvings were beautiful, each face rendered with such care, each gesture so alive. But Dewey felt her attention drifting, not away from the temple, but into something else. Into the walking itself, into the rhythm of her feet on stone, into the sound of distant birdsong and the rustle of wind through nearby trees. The third gallery. The fourth, climbing. The stories continued on the walls, Jataka tales, teachings, Dharma, unfolding in endless panels of carved stone. But Dewey found she wasn't really looking anymore. Her eyes were open, seeing the carvings, but her attention had softened into something more diffuse. She was aware of the stone, the mist, the other pilgrims moving in the same slow, clockwise procession. But there was less sense of separation between all these things. Just movement, just presence, just the temple breathing itself into existence moment by moment. Fifth gallery. The stories were subtler here, more refined. The carvings showed awakened beings, bodhisattvas teaching wisdom and compassion. Dewey paused at one relief, a figure sitting in perfect stillness beneath a tree, palm trees and flowers surrounding them, other figures approaching with offerings. The stone figure's face was serene, not happy, not sad, just there, present, complete. Dewey stood looking at that face for a long time, or maybe no time at all. Time had gone strange since she'd started climbing. Hours felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. Or maybe time hadn't gone anywhere. Maybe time had always been like this, just the eternal present appearing in different costumes. And she'd finally stopped being fooled by the disguises. She climbed higher. The square galleries ended. The architecture changed. She emerged onto the first circular terrace, and everything opened up. No more walls closing in the path. No more reliefs to follow. Just open space. And stupas, bell-shaped structures, perforated with diamond-shaped openings, arranged in concentric circles. Inside each stupa sat a stone Buddha. Dewey could see them through the opening's serene faces, hands in various mudras, all of them the same and all of them unique. She walked slowly around the circular terrace, and with each step something was loosening. What was it? Some kind of grip she'd been maintaining without knowing it? Some kind of effort she'd been making without realizing it took effort? Her legs were tired now. Her feet ached. But the tiredness felt different than the exhaustion she'd been carrying for years. This was just the body being tired. Natural. Simple. Not weighted with meaning or story. Second circular terrace. More stupas, arranged in a tighter circle. The mist was beginning to lift as the sun rose somewhere beyond the eastern mountains. But up here on the temple, the mist still lingered, soft and wet and intimate. Dewey could barely see the distant rice terraces, the villages, the world she'd climbed up from. It all looked like a dream now, not unreal, but no more real than dreams are. Just forms appearing in emptiness, dissolving back into emptiness, appearing again. Third, circular terrace. Fewer stupas now, closer to the center. Dewey's breathing had gotten very slow. Deep. She wasn't controlling it, it was just happening that way, as if her body knew something her mind didn't. She could see the central stupa, now the largest one, solid and unperforated, containing nothing visible, or containing everything, depending on how you looked at it. She walked the final circle. Slowly, so slowly. Each step took forever and no time at all. The mist moved across the terrace in gentle waves, obscuring and revealing, obscuring and revealing. The sun was rising. The light was changing. Everything was changing. Always changing. Always exactly this. When she reached the central stupa, she stood for a moment with her hand on the cool stone. Then, without planning to, she sat down, back against the stupa, legs folded, hands resting in her lap. She closed her eyes. The sounds were still there: wind, distant voices, bird song, the rustle of other pilgrims' feet on stone. But they weren't separate from the silence. They were part of it. Sounds appearing in silence, dissolving back into silence, never actually breaking the silence at all. Her body was still there, the tired legs, the aching feet, the heart beating in her chest, the breath moving in and out. But it wasn't hers somehow. Or it was hers, but she wasn't it. Or there was no she separate from the body, and the body was just bodying, the way the wind was winding and the temple was templing, and the whole world was worlding itself into existence and out of existence every single moment. Where was Dewey? Where had she ever been? The tired widow, the grieving wife, the worried mother, where were those? Thoughts had claimed she was those things. Thoughts had told that story. But thoughts were just thoughts, appearing like clouds, dissolving like clouds, never actually touching the sky. And what remained when the thoughts dissolved? What was here before thoughts started and after thoughts ended? What was looking through these eyes, hearing through these ears, breathing this breath, sitting against this stone? Not something, not a thing that could be named or grasped. Just this. Just the seamless presence that had no boundary, no beginning, no end. The space in which everything appeared. The emptiness that wasn't empty but luminously aware. The stillness that moved as all movement. The silence that sounded as all sound. Dewey, if there was still a Dewey. And maybe there wasn't. Maybe there never had been Dewey dissolved. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just dissolved. Like mist dissolving in sunlight. Gently. Naturally. As if returning to what had always been true. The boundaries softened. The sense of being a separate person. Here. Looking out at a world that was there that dissolved too. Not into unconsciousness. Into something bigger than consciousness and unconsciousness. Into what contained both. Into what contained everything. She sat there for hours. Or minutes. Time had no meaning up here at the center of the mandala. At the heart of the cosmos. At the source of all things. Other pilgrims came and went, completing their circumambulations, moving back down the levels to return to their lives. The sun rose higher. The mist burned away. The day grew warm. And still Dewey sat, or stillness sat where Dewey had been. Or there was just sitting, with no one doing it, the way there's just breathing with no breather, just seeing with no seer. Just the whole world appearing and disappearing in vast, spacious awareness that had no center and no edge. When she finally opened her eyes, and who knows what made her open them. What impulse arose in consciousness to move the eyelids apart? The world looked different. Or she looked at the world differently. Or there was no difference between the world and the looking, between the temple and the awareness perceiving the temple, between form and emptiness, emptiness and form. She stood, slowly. Her body was stiff from sitting, but somehow the stiffness wasn't a problem. It was just stiffness. Arising, being, passing, like everything else. She walked back down the terraces, slowly, in no hurry, with nowhere to go, really, since everywhere was here, and here was everywhere, and the walking was just walking itself, with no walker needed to make it happen. When she reached the base, she kept walking, past the temple, through the trees, along the paths between rice terraces. The farmers were in the fields, planting or weeding or checking the water levels. Children played near a stream. Women carried baskets of fruit to market. Life was lifing itself. The ordinary world doing its ordinary thing. And it was so beautiful. So unutterably, impossibly beautiful. Not because it was special or perfect or spiritual, but because it was, because it appeared, because the emptiness kept clothing itself in forms, over and over, endlessly creative, endlessly generous, for no reason at all. Dewey returned to her small house. She sat at her loom. Her hands took up the threads and began to weave. She made cloth. She traded it for rice. She ate. She slept. She woke. Days passed. Seasons passed. Years passed. But something had shifted. The tiredness had lifted, not because anything changed externally, but because there was no one left to be tired. Or there was someone, and she got tired, but the tiredness didn't define her. It was just tiredness, arising in the vast space that she was, that she had always been, that everything was. Sometimes people would ask her about that day at Borobudur. What happened up there? You seem different. Did you have a vision? Did you achieve enlightenment? And Dewey would smile and say, I climbed a temple. I sat down. I stood up. I came home. Nothing special happened. And this was true. Nothing special had happened. And everything had happened. The dissolving of the illusion of separation, the recognition of what had always been true, the return home to what had never been left. But how do you explain that? How do you put into words what happens when words dissolve? How do you describe the space that contains all description? How do you point at the moon that's not separate from your pointing finger? You don't. You just sit at your loom and weave cloth. You just walk through rice terraces and watch farmers plant seedlings. You just live your ordinary life. And the ordinary life reveals itself as extraordinary, not because it becomes something else, but because you finally see what it always was. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The temple rising from the plain is the plain rising as temple. The widow sitting at her loom is the whole universe weaving itself into existence. There's no one separate from life. There's just life, living itself, and the recognition sometimes crystal clear, sometimes obscured, that this is it. This is what you were looking for. This ordinary, miraculous, ever-present, never graspable, already complete this. The temple stands. The mist rises. Pilgrims climb. They circle the galleries, ascending, level by level, story by story, teaching by teaching. And at the top, the central stupa contains nothing visible, or everything. And those who sit there long enough dissolve into what they've always been, the vast, spacious awareness in which temples and mist and pilgrims and morning light all appear, like dreams appearing in the mind of space itself. Let your breathing soften now. Feel how the body rests without effort. How thoughts arise and dissolve like mist on morning water. How awareness simply is, requiring nothing, seeking nothing, just present. The way a temple stands, the way light fills a room, the way sleep comes when there's no one left resisting sleep. Just the gentle dissolving of boundaries, of effort, of the one who would sleep, leaving only sleep itself. Vast, spacious, complete, nothing to remember, nothing to understand. Just this, just now, just the soft letting go into what was never separate, into what has always been home. And so our journey together comes to rest, like a pilgrim reaching the summit, like mist dissolving into morning air, like the breath that finally releases and doesn't need to rise again. Tonight you've traveled through 8 profound teachings. From ancient China, where a monk discovered that seeking itself was the obstacle, to Korea, where another found his Buddha nature had never been lost, to Tibet, where a woman learned to recognize the sky behind the clouds, to Thailand, where grief became spacious, to Japan, where imperfection revealed its hidden perfection, to Mongolia, where vastness recognized itself, and finally, to Java, where all boundaries dissolved at the temple's heart. 8 stories from 8 traditions, but really just one truth appearing in different clothes. The truth that what you're seeking is what's seeking. That home is not a destination but recognition. That the backward step is simply stopping the forward search. That you are the sky, not the weather. That awareness is already here, already whole, already complete. Let these teachings work in you the way rain soaks into earth, without effort, without understanding, just absorption. Just allowing the wisdom to settle where words cannot reach. You don't need to remember the stories. You don't need to practice the teachings. You don't need to become anything you're not already. Just rest. Just allow. Just be the spacious awareness you've always been. And if tomorrow you notice moments of recognition, brief gaps in the mental commentary, spaces where you remember you're the sky, brief dissolutions of the separate self, then wonderful. And if you don't, that's wonderful too. Because the teaching continues whether you notice it or not. Working in the dark soil of consciousness. Preparing flowers you haven't imagined yet. Thank you for walking this path tonight. Thank you for taking the backward step with me. Thank you for remembering what was never truly forgotten. May you rest deeply. May you wake gently. May you live from spaciousness. May you recognize home everywhere you go, because you carry it with you, because you are it, because there's nowhere else to be. Good night. Release. Dissolve.